Thanks, John. Well, the change triangle is just the best tool that I ever found to understand the relationship between our emotions and anxiety and depression, and really how emotions work in the mind and body when we block them, which isn't good for us, or when we learn how to be with them, which is what the change triangle is all about. And this is a tool that I came across in my training, and then I just wondered, why doesn't everybody know this? I would have benefited a lot if I had seen this triangle in high school, even. So I would encourage everybody listening to open another screen and to Google the change triangle. And I think various different diagrams will come up, but you'll see the basic principle that it's an inverted triangle with the point having these things called core emotions, which I'll go over in a moment. And then if you were to superimpose it on your body, where core emotions, the point would be in your body. And then when we move away from our emotions, we kind of come into our head. And the top of the triangle is anxiety and other inhibitory emotions on one side, and the way we block uncomfortable feelings caused by any type of emotion, we move away into defenses, which are anything, by definition, anything we do to avoid emotions. And we can do it with using other emotions. We can do it by behaviors. We can do it, behaviors like drinking, or thoughts by beating ourselves up and telling us we're no good, by gestures like shoulder shrugging or eye rolling. These are all ways that we avoid emotions.
So that's great. And there's so much there in the change triangle that, you know, f- for me, I love what you wrote on both these top five things. And so why don't we just jump into what you kind of mentioned as you started with the change triangle? It's a great tool to check in with your mind and body. And so why don't you just tell me, maybe give me an example for you. And if you want, I'll give an example for me of, like, when do you check in with your mind and body, or what happens to you on the change triangle, or how you get triggered to say, oh, I better check in with my mind and body.
Thanks. That's a great question. And one of the reasons that John and I wanted to do this is because I've heard myself on many podcasts that I've been on, and I started to feel there's not enough practical information that I'm delivering on how I use this pretty much on a daily basis. I know, John, would you say that you use the change triangle frequently?
I try, and I think I want to share is that it is a lifelong process, and some issues you may never even figure out how to get to even notice where you're on the change trial. But, the first step here, check in, notice your mind and body, or I think what the five ways to work, check in with your mind and body. So it's like, okay, where am I today? And I
Exactly.
find that, my body frequently now is well attuned to tell me, oh, everything's good to go. We're calm and curious, or, we're anxious. And then I try and look underneath to what my body is telling me, why I'm anxious. Am I scared?
Exactly. Exactly. So for the longest time, I could recognize that had anxiety, but I wouldn't know what to do with it as a certainly not as a child, where we rely on our caregivers, our parents. But then as a teenager and as a young adult, it was just that I was sort of mired in my feelings with nothing to do per se about them except to try to figure them out. And so the change triangle is a real big paradigm shift from trying to figure out what's going on in our head to actually going into the body where emotions live. Emotions are pretty much just a conglomeration of physical sensations, right? Because the basic purpose of a core emotion from an evolutionary standpoint is to make our bodies react very quickly to danger or to interest and excitement, things that are good for us, that we need, we want to move towards, and things that are bad for us, we move away from or we fight against. Hence anger, fear, sadness is a core emotion, right? That tells us that we need comfort. Joy and excitement bring us towards things that are good for us. So while we're kind of sold a bill of goods in our culture that emotions are happening up in our head, uh, the major thing here, there's really two major points before we get into the five ways to work the change triangle as a beginner, is one, that you can't control your emotions. So you're not weak, There's nothing wrong with you for having emotions, whether you have a kind of whether you're relatively calm and just have sort of little emotions. Emotions are like waves, or whether you're one of these people that has lots of emotions. There's nothing wrong with you. Emotions just trigger automatically the way they're meant to, based on what's happening in the environment. So it's not whether we have emotions, it's what we do with them that counts. And the other myth that we're told is that emotions are kind of happening in our mind. And so the major shift here is that we're going to be going into the body, even though every ounce of our being might pull us up into our thoughts. We're trying to bring back a balance between thoughts, which are happening in our head, and emotions, which are majorly happening in our body. So,
So,
yeah.
yeah, so I'm just like, so like with the head and the body. So how do you, because that's what the first one was, check in with the mind and the body. So could you just tell me, like, either now or maybe when you were more upset when you were younger, before you had all this knowledge,
Mhm.
you were learning, how did you get yourself to check in, and what would be the, ways you would check in with your mind and body, just on a practical term?
Yeah, well, I only knew to do this since after I learned the change triangle, which was around the age of 40. So I'll just talk about how I use it on a daily basis. Let's say all of a sudden I have a feeling inside, right? Let's say I don't even know what caused it, but I just become aware. And now I'm pretty good at being aware. I notice a shift from the open-hearted state where I'm calm and my body feels calm and nothing is kind of knocking me out of my calm state, to all of a sudden being aware I don't feel as good as I did a moment ago. It could be from someone bumping into me in the street. Could be, I imagine most people are out there driving cars when somebody cuts you off, and it triggers you to, like, be angry at the person cutting you off. It may be that my child said something to me that was hurtful or I didn't like, or that I said something to my kid that I later all of a sudden was like, why did I say that? Or John, between you and I, sometimes if we disagree. So the checking into the body is really for people who aren't used to noticing what's going on below the neck. I recommend a few times a day as you're learning to work this triangle, because ultimately we're trying to identify at any given moment of the day. Are we in a defensive state, right, where we're not tuning into our emotions? Are we in an anxious or shame-ridden or guilt-ridden state? Are we in a core emotional state where we're feeling a pure emotion of sadness or anger or fear or joy? Or are we below the triangle in that open-hearted state where we're calm and compassionate towards ourselves and curious in the world, where good things happen? And the goal really is to spend more and more time in this open-hearted state of the authentic self, right? There's no perfection here. Nobody spends all their time in that state, but we're trying to spend more and more time in calm and what's called in the jargon regulated states, where the mind and the body and everything is kind of working in concert together and we feel our best self, ready to
So
meet the challenges of the world.
but are you saying that you don't anymore, that you're mostly in a calm, regulated state, so you don't notice, or you don't take active steps, that you're checking in with your mind and body, or, that's,
No, I'm not saying that at all, that no matter how much therapy, how much processing one has done, emotions are there ideally, well, emotions happen when the environment triggers them. So because we're living life, right, things are going to trigger the environment. There's losses when people are sick or die. There's that trigger sadness and fear. There's having illnesses. There's problems. There's hearing your kids have problems. There's wonderful things that happen and exciting things. And all of those things are going to evoke emotions. But those emotions come up, and then when we're with them, right, like we're talking about, when we tune into them, notice what they feel like in our body, stay with the sensation. They're like waves, and we ride up the wave and down the wave, and then we come back to a calm state. Now, for people who have suffered a lot of trauma and who haven't done a lot of work processing the emotions from the past, you're going to then get even more triggered that something happening in the environment that might not have a lot of oomph in a situation where there wasn't a lot of trauma will trigger. An example of that is when you constantly feel hurt by people's actions, even though people's actions are maybe they're just taking care of themselves. So for example, you invite someone to dinner and they say no. If we had a lot of trauma and rejection in our past, somebody saying no might trigger us to feeling bad about ourselves or to feeling very angry, very insulted. But if we work on our past emotions, when our early parents and we were children made us feel bad and those were processed, then again, what's happening in the present becomes less, we're less ignited because it's not dovetailing on many past insults. So again, how much trauma one has had in their past will affect how the emotions feel in the present, but still we work the change triangle the same way, which is to notice what's happening. So for example, going back to step one, the top way to begin working the change triangle is for 2 or 3 times, make a note in the calendar, in your own calendar or in some place that you look at frequently, to simply check in to what you're experiencing. And what this would look like is basically stopping what you're doing, right? If you can, slow movement, maybe have a seat on a comfortable sofa, or just stand still and feel your feet on the floor. Take a couple of deep breaths because we have to slow everything down, not for long, just for a minute, and notice what am I thinking about right now? I'm thinking about what I'm going to make for dinner, or I'm thinking about how I need to do all these things, or I'm thinking about how am I going to find a babysitter for the kids. So you just want to validate the thoughts happening in your mind. And then you want to slowly scan your body from head to toe and toe to head, and just notice physically what you're feeling, right? So maybe I'm feeling a little jittery in my chest. That tells me that I have some anxiety. Or maybe my stomach is a little tight. Or maybe my neck is a little bit tight, right? These are all the tension places that we have. And then we can validate, yep, I'm a little tense, I'm a little anxious, I'm a little revved up, I'm having trouble slowing down. Just the mere act of noticing with compassion and curiosity, never judgment, not trying to change anything, not trying to fix anything. We're trying to notice what's happening. And just the act of doing that is healing and integrating for the brain and the mind and the body. Eventually we'll get more sophisticated, so that you can find, if I'm anxious, which we'll get to that step, what do I do with that feeling? But the checking in several times a day is to get in the habit of not only noticing what's happening in my mind, but to be able to put some language on the sensations in my body, for better and for worse. And it's interesting, John, you may have noticed this too, it's much easier to notice when things are uncomfortable or painful. In my practice, all day, every day, people are saying, oh, something, this is good, right? How you doing? I'm doing well. Or how did that go? That went well. And I'll invite someone to say, can we slow down and notice? I know when I say something feels well for me or good for me, what does that feel like for you? Can we put some language on what inside your body is telling you that you feel good or that you feel well? And then we have to struggle to put positive language on. Like examples of positive physical feelings are open, light, airy, energy coming out that's like excitement, warm, safe, that type of language. But sometimes we have to struggle to put that type of language on what we're feeling, where the brain notices the tough stuff most often. We have to struggle to notice and put language on the good stuff.
So would you say when you check in with your mind and body, if you notice I'm always going to the negative, to try and remind yourself, so I'm checking with my mind and body, I have it in my calendar, I'm going to check in, once or twice, any number of times a day, would you also add, look for something good and look for something bad, or just remind me to look for something good? Or is that what you're saying?
That's an excellent question. So yes, I think you can make the exercise a little more challenging by noticing what are the areas of tension and anxiety or sadness, some of the hard feelings. And at the same time, can I find any place in my body that feels solid, calm, still? And we can have multiple places in our body. We just have to shift our attention that way. There's an exercise on YouTube that's called Dropping into the Body that I wrote, which is exactly that. We first find a still and calm and solid place. From that perspective, we look for some tension. We work with that tension and anxiety, and then we come back to the solid, calm place. So we end on a good note. Or as you like to say, let's end on an up note.
Yeah, no, I guess so. What you're saying is like working the change triangle is trying to get aware to get back to that calm state. Yeah,
Exactly.
and I see both. I think we touched upon both, but I want to reiterate. So the number one thing that the change triangle do for you is to impart distance and perspective from our distress. And what you were saying before, which is the number one way on working the change triangle, is to notice the mind and body, and just you notice, and in the noticing you get distance,
In the noticing, you get distance. Yes.
and that gives you
By
some
noticing.
perspective. And those are the two things. So it's really just trying to make a break from whatever state you're in to just say, oh, what state am I in? And just that step from being in the state to asking yourself a question of where I am, it really is the first move on the change triangle.
Exactly. And that it's not that that's going to take away, like if we're truly suffering, we're going to be suffering. But then if we notice our suffering as we are suffering, then in the noticing, we can actually work to do something to help ourselves, right? And there's various ways when we are suffering. For example, we can, with our noticing part, be compassionate and which a lot of people struggle with, but that's like, it's more like, if your friend was suffering and you were compassionate, it's sort of like, oh, it's like, oh, poor me, oh, I see you're suffering. Extending some sort of loving care, imagining hugging your suffering, whatever way that you can figure out how to extend some compassion, as opposed to what most people do is beat themselves up for their suffering. It's my fault. Why do I suffer like this? This is what I do. And then we're just raising the suffering. So we want to notice our suffering, and then as a self-help exercise, we can give ourselves compassion. With a therapist who does AEDP or other type of experiential work, or even psychoanalytic work, we can notice the suffering and then try to communicate with it and see what it needs to help it and to even heal that suffering, particularly if it's picking up on an old trauma. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and when you talk about noticing the difference and then trying to give compassion and empathy to the suffering, I hear, for me, I hear you introducing this concept of parts of us, and that my suffering is not all of me. And in the noticing is only where you will realize it, because the suffering is all consuming for many people, is what it is.
That's correct. Exactly that. And then, by knowing that we have multiple parts of us, all of us, that's totally normal, we can then also bring into the fact that we can have more than one emotion at the same time. That's another that was another aha moment for me, that I can feel love, right? Loving feelings and angry feelings at the exact same time. Right.
Learning to hold the conflicts is part of like great noticing and not beating on yourself, and just awareness.
Exactly. Huge. Because conflicts are what cause the bulk of anxiety and stress and depression. For example, the conflict when we had abuse or neglect as children, right? We're wired to both love our parents, and yet we're also wired that if somebody is hurting us, to be enraged at them. And so that's why children who are raised in abusive and neglectful families really suffer so much, because they have these two equally important forces that are causing like this inside all the time, the tension. And in the same way, we have a core emotion come up, right, with this energy that tells us something important about ourselves, right? And That's what
Like
this
I'm
whole
angry about the abuse or something like that.
exactly. And then we have these inhibitory emotions that push down that say it's not okay to be angry, or if we know that we're angry, we won't know what to do with that. And so anxiety or shame, right, which sort of puts us under a rock or tells us we're bad, not the people who hurt us were
Right.
bad.
And when you're young, you don't know. So of course, if you're being abused, there's no room for the anger if your parent is the abuser and they're big and powerful and all everything to the child.
It's exactly right. And so it's only after we're older that we can start to deal with these conflicts, which we can handle now as adults, make space for both parts, and then be with each side of the conflict separately. So now we're into sort of advanced change triangle work, but right,
Okay.
it's
If
all
you see the practical implications, that's I think when we started this conversation, yeah, those are a couple of practical examples
yes.
of what to do with the change triangle, why it's useful, really to kind of break down these different parts or give labels. I don't know, but it certainly seems helpful.
Yes, it does. So that was so the top 5 ways to work the change triangle as a beginner is number one, taking the time to notice and check in what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and what emotions that you notice. And you can print out a copy of the change triangle on my website under the toolbox section. It says print the change triangle, and people carry it around with them in their wallets and pull it out, and you can start to map out what you're feeling and what you use to defend against your feelings, and as a part to get to know yourself again, to really get to know yourself with interest and curiosity, not with intent to judge or be hard on yourself. But the more you know yourself, the more you can change positively.
Right. And now I'm jumping into number two, which is where you're at on ways to work the change triangle. You're right. Notice if you are calm, having feelings in parentheses, either core or inhibitory, up in your head, thinking thoughts, or checked out altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would think it's even hard to, label those. What do you tell your patients or people that you talk to on, how to, really understand? I guess it's easy to say I'm anxious because that's everyone knows maybe, or they're starting to know when they're anxious versus calm.
Yeah,
But
well,
what is up in your head thinking thoughts or checked out? What's the difference between checked out altogether and up in your head thinking thoughts? Or are those what you mean by defenses?
yes, exactly. So, by definition, a defense is anything we do to avoid our emotional experience. You can have thoughts and emotional experiences, which is the ultimate goal, that we want to know what we're thinking. We want to think and feel our feelings and connect and relate all at the same time. That's one of the goals for good emotional health and good relationships.
But how do I know if I'm thinking about work or I'm thinking about my kids?
Yes.
Am I in my defensive state or am I in my open-hearted state? Because
Uh, Right. Well, that all depends on if you're in touch. So we're all in our heads most of the day, right? But at any given moment, do you have the freedom to dip down and also simultaneously say what to know what feelings are going along with my thoughts. So I may be having a thought about all the things that I have to do, and that might make one person anxious, and it might make another person feel proud and excited. It might make another person feel scared. It might make another person feel sad. It might make another person feel angry. So it's unique. We want to be able to have access to know what we're feeling at any given moment. And the way we know what we're feeling is by how these sensations show up in our body. So, sadness, for example, John, when you feel sad, do you have a sense of what that feels like physically in your body?
I mean, certainly I get pressure behind my eyes if it really comes up and I can notice, oh yeah, I'm sad because I'm about, I feel like crying or I'm aware that I'm sad.
Yeah, great, great. And for me, I always get this kind of heavy feeling in my chest.
Yeah, and
Right.
I may get a lump in my throat. I mean, all these cliches,
Yeah.
they come about because that's the way the body reacts.
Yeah, exactly. So we just, again, it's being able to, without being frightened of what we feel inside. Most of us are frightened of ourselves, right? It's like, oh my gosh, to go down into my body and feel what I'm feeling, that's scary at first. But with some practice and with some knowledge that I teach in sessions like this and in my therapy sessions, and that I put in the book in the whole enchilada, so you could really see that there's um, an emotion is painful, but it's not going to kill us, and that we can safely learn how to be with sensations, the ones that are, I'm not talking about heavy trauma where we're into these like horrific experiences that you do need a therapist for. But uh, I'm really talking about being able to begin to notice how on a daily basis, how connected or disconnected we are with what's happening in our body.
So, I mean, from a practical standpoint, if I'm watching this and I've read the book and I'm working the change, I'm trying to, you know, I, if I'm scared to, dip into anger or sadness or my own
Yeah.
fear, are you saying, when do I know to go? I guess the question I'm asking in practical standpoint, when do I know to go to a therapist, or I'm okay talking to a friend, or, I really, what, how do you expect people to try and work this?
Well, I think when you reach a limit and you get stuck and you really can't go on by yourself and you have a desire to get to the root of, what is keeping me stuck, then you would seek some counseling. What I tell people in session when they are about to dip into their body down, I say just try for 20 seconds, and then we'll come back up and talk about it. So again, what you want to, and one of this sort of the secrets to tolerating the physical aspects of an emotion is to drop the storyline in your head. So I'll give you an example, because when I'm very upset, let's say I was very sad or distraught about some bad news, and I wanted to process it. Let's say I wanted to help myself cry so that it wouldn't get blocked. I would just, with a stance of compassion, loving stance towards myself and curiosity, I would drop the storyline, meaning the bad news that I was told. I would even drop the emotion of sadness, and I would just focus on the physical sensation of the sadness in my body. And that would be the only thing going on. And I would do that as I breathe nice and deeply to help it move up and out. And then I could then move into like a good cry and get it out, and then I might feel better and be able to say, okay, what do I want to do next? How do I want to soothe myself or soothe the person? How do I want to take this sadness and bring it to my relationships? Do I need comfort? Do I need to go to you for a hug, for example? Do I need to talk to a therapist because it feels bigger than what I can handle alone? So
But
there's some getting to know oneself in terms of what you need, but I do my best on my own. And then if I need somebody else, then it's because I can't get rid of the feeling, and I can't move through the feeling. And so I know that I need help with it.
but it sounds like a good example of, you noticed your sadness, you went into it, and then after the wave came, it sounds like you felt better. Um, but when you drop into that feeling, you're saying you forget all thoughts. So you don't even think about what is causing the sadness. You're just breathing into the feeling and just trying to stay calm.
Yes, I'm breathing into the feeling, and again, trying to stay grounded and calm, even though I'm having this feeling, but I try to stay calm. I think what you mean is that I
I
don't.
mean, I think I didn't mean to stay calm, just, but I'm not up in my head anymore.
Right.
I'm totally aware of this pit in my stomach or my heart fluttering,
Yes.
and just noticing with compassion, I guess.
Exactly, and seeing if it feels better. The pit in the stomach and the vibration in the chest, those are anxiety. And so by giving anxiety some attention, again, compassionate, curious attention, and breathing into it for 20, 30 seconds, you may get some relief. You may also get some relief while you feel the underlying core emotion come up and out. And again, that's real sort of, then you're working the change triangle to really process anxiety, as opposed to just noticing where on the triangle you happen to be. right? Because we started with, am I in a defense? Well, yes, if I am cut off from what I'm feeling and I feel numb, or I feel disconnected, or I feel, all alone and unfamiliar with myself, or I feel out of body. These are all ways that we disconnect in kind of drastic ways. But if I'm just having a thought and I can very flexibly bring attention to how I'm feeling also, then I wouldn't call that a defense. I would just call that being in a pensive state or in a work state or something like that. Or a temporary defense, right? We want soft defenses so that we can move in and out of them at will, not be pulled into them when we want to connect, but we can't escape our defenses. That's when we have to try to move them aside and say, if I didn't escape into this way and I was in my body, what would I be feeling?
Yeah, it's
And, and can I tolerate that feeling? Can I label the core emotions underneath it, right? Can I calm my anxiety down through grounding and breathing and begin to name the underlying emotions? And I ask myself, I do this when I'm anxious. I'm like, okay, Hilary, are you sad? Check. Are you angry? No. Are you afraid? Check. Are you excited? Check. So I'm going to run through the 7 core emotions, and I'm going to try to validate all that I can, but hold them separately, right? So if core emotions are all clumped together on top of each other, that makes us anxious. But if we can say, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm afraid, I'm excited, and name all that we have, and imagine that there's kind of space and air in between each one, then we have to go back to each one to work with it individually, because they all have their own separate programs. Which is something I didn't say, that really a core emotion is, if you want to think of it as like a little software program that tells us something adaptive for survival. And the way we experience a feeling internally, right? Nothing is happening, is, let's say I lose something that I care about. Let's say an old picture, an heirloom picture, and it's gone, right? And I feel sad because sad happens from losses. And I'm able to say, I'm sad. I know I'm sad. How do I know I'm sad? Because I have this heavy feeling in my chest. I can stay with this heavy feeling without being afraid of it. And I can listen to what it's telling me. It's telling me I want to cry because I've lost this thing that I care about. And it's telling me that I want to share it with somebody and have somebody say, that's okay. I'm so sorry. That really sucks. And that I can let the impulse out and maybe go tell a friend and act on that impulse if I want to, or just give myself a big hug, or just soothe myself and tell me you'll feel better in a few days, that it really sucks.
yeah, that's great. That's really great. No, this change triangle certainly gave you a lot of language that you've shared and gave me a lot of language. Like the last thing you say on what it can do for you is it gives you direction. So you go, I'm up in a defense. Oh, I really want to kind of understand where I'm at and then process a little bit. Or I'm anxious, or I'm feeling guilty. Oh, look, I'm feeling guilty. I think I did a bad act to someone. Then it's like, oh, I can take a step. So if I get awareness, I can make amends, or I can take a step to do something differently or add to it. So even noticing gives you time to choose direction, it feels
Exactly. Well, the whole point of the change triangle is it's a map towards what to do to feel better. And it's
like.
a map to understand yourself. And we work it and work it and work it every day over time and practice. And over a lifetime, we actually move through the triangle on a broader sense, spending more and more time in calm states and less in anxious and defensive states. Exactly.
All right. Well, I think we kind of covered a little practical stuff here. Even just focusing on number one of each side of getting awareness, checking in with the mind and body. Everything else flows through that, especially if you memorize the change triangle and know the 3 points and what are my core emotions, or am I anxious? Am I up in my head in defenses? It's actually a great map for me. I thank you for your hard work.
Oh, I can't imagine my life without the change triangle. I'm so grateful that I stumbled on it and that I can share it with other people. This was a concept that came from the scientific literature, and I just thought, why didn't I learn this in in high school. And why doesn't everybody get this information? Because who gets any emotion education in our culture? For whatever reason, we don't get it. And there's lots of science and literature and research on emotions. We know a lot about how the brain works and the body regarding emotions. So I encourage everybody to learn as much as they can, and to let people know that there's tons of free resources on hilaryjacobshendel.com. There's written resources and videos and audios and podcasts. And then for people that like self-help books and exercises, the book It's Not Always Depression is the full lesson in how to work the change triangle. And most of it is stories from my practice, so you can see how I help people move from defensive and symptomatic states of depression and anxiety and social anxiety and rage states, and how they move through the change triangle down to their open-hearted, authentic state. And by seeing it, it demystifies it so it's not so scary. And then there's some exercises that are very gentle for you to work the change triangle along with me and my patients in the book. And then I peppered in some science for those of you who like that, but without any jargon. It's very accessible and easy to read. There's no fancy language, because that's the kind of books that I like to read. So thank you for listening, John. Thank you for helping me communicate some practical tips about the change triangle. And is there anything else that you think would be a good thing to end on, that from your experience of not teaching the change triangle, but being taught the change triangle, that you would want people to know?
Yeah, no, I think just, keep trying to check in and get that awareness to get to those core emotions. And I think the most important thing is just checking off those emotions. Like you said, am I sad? No, maybe not. Am I angry? Yeah, I'm really angry. Am I scared? Am I fearful? A little bit. Am I disgusted? I may be disgusted. And disgust, you just wrote a great article about, is, you don't really think about it much, but it's a big one. And then, am I really excited? And I'm not aware that I'm excited about moving forward. A lot of times I think the excitement and the joy get blocked for people who never learned how to feel the positive emotion. So
Exactly right.
it's a great tool to kind of help show me where I'm at. So I thank you.
Thanks for that, John. Very important. Exactly. The positive emotions people struggle with even more because they make us feel big and take up space. And if we had to keep ourselves very small growing up and in our society, which we sort of do in a way, we're told, don't be too big for your bootstraps, and don't be too full of yourself. And yet it's, again, another myth, because if we feel good about ourselves, we generally have more kindness to give other people and more generosity. It's really, what we don't like is arrogance, where that's really a sign of insecurity, not genuine feeling good and connected to your authentic self and wanting to help other people feel good too. So that's very important. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Okay, and we'll be back with more videos.
Okay.
Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.